steam curled through the hush of the prairie morning like breath from a tired beast. The train had come and gone, leaving behind a hush too fragile to touch. On the edge of the platform stood a wide man with a weathered Stetson in his hands, his eyes shaded and searching. The early light caught on the scar near his jaw, a thin silver line earned in silence long ago. Children stood before him, 2 girls no older than 3, dusty shoes, tangled hair, and cheeks smudged with soot from the ride. One of them, her eyes dark as dried blueberries, stepped forward. She looked up with the solemnity of someone who had already seen too much and whispered, "Are you the cowboy who can find our mommy?" Clayton McGraw didn't blink. He squatted slowly, his knees creaking like barn doors, and smiled so gently it softened his whole face. "Just 2," he said, "and I've found them." Celia Hawthorne watched from behind, her fingers clenched in the folds of her traveling skirt. Her boots were borrowed from her sister, her coat 2 winters out of style. She hadn't planned to speak first. She hadn't planned to speak at all. Yet now, as the rancher stood and nodded toward the buckboard waiting beside the corral fence, her breath caught on the edge of confession. Clayton didn't ask her name. Not then. He only tipped his hat toward the girls, took one in each arm with a gentleness unexpected from a man so broad, and lifted them onto the wagon seat. When Celia climbed up beside them, Maisie crawled into her lap, curling against her mother's chest like a habit older than memory. The ride to the ranch was long and quiet. Wind played in the grass like a song half remembered. Cattle moved slow on the ridge. Clayton whistled once, low and tuneless, just to fill the hush. Celia stole a glance at him. His face wasn't what Annalai had described in her letters. She had called him clumsy, overgrown, pitiful even. But now, seeing the way he flicked the reins with care, how his eyes softened each time Maisie shifted in sleep, Celia wondered what her sister had truly seen, and what she had missed. The house rose from the land like it had grown there. Weather clabbered, a porch that sagged at one end, a wheelbarrow half filled with straw. Inside, it smelled of ash and pine soap. The curtains were white. The silence, honest. "I'll fix supper," Clayton said. "You rest your feet." Celia opened her mouth to protest, but he was already gone, boots thudding gently across the wooden floor. She took off Maisie's shoes. They were damp, her feet cold and birdlike. She held them and rubbed warmth into her child's skin, tears pressing behind her eyes like guests she refused to entertain. That night, Celia stood in the doorway of the kitchen while Clayton stirred beans and sliced cornbread with calloused hands. She don't talk much," she said, watching Maisie clutch a rag doll at the hearth. He nodded. "Some folks got too many words. She's just choosing the right ones." Celia blinked, surprised. "You don't mind?" "Didn't marry for chatter," he said, not looking up. She flinched. The word marry was too close, too heavy, too sharp against her skin. She hadn't told him yet, not truly, that it wasn't Annalai he'd received, that the girl who stepped off that train wasn't the one he'd written to for 6 long months, that the real bride had turned back 2 towns away, left her dress, her name, her shame in Celia's hands like a burden wrapped in silk. But how could she tell him now, when Maisie had started humming in her sleep, when the wind here didn't smell like coal smoke and regret, when for once she could breathe? The days passed in quiet rhythms. Mornings brought the clink of milk pails and soft neighs from the barn. Clayton never touched her, never hovered, but he showed her how to mend a fence, how to pat the mule's flank without spooking him, how to find the wild mint near the stream. He showed Maisie how to brush the roan's mane, letting her hold the comb even when she dropped it twice. There were no questions about the past, only silences that held more truth than talk ever could. Then, one afternoon, a letter arrived. Clayton sat on the porch steps, the envelope torn open in his thick fingers. Celia watched from the window as his shoulders tightened. He didn't move for a long time. Then he folded the letter once, twice, 3 times, deliberate, and placed it on the railing beside him. She stepped out. "Is it from her?" He didn't look at her. She said she couldn't do it. Called me. Too large. Said she wouldn't pretend. Celia felt the words like fists. She didn't know which hurt more, the letter or the fact that he'd read it without anger, without surprise. I wasn't supposed to come, she said, voice thin. It was Annalai. But she backed out last minute. She said she couldn't bear the idea, that you'd expect too much, that you'd disappoint her. I came for Maisie. I needed a roof. I never meant to lie. She waited for him to rise, to shout, to turn away. Instead, he reached over, picked up the letter, and lit a match to it. The paper curled, blackened, floated into the dusk like ash returning to the earth. That girl was never meant to live here, he said finally, his voice rough. Celia stared. And me? He met her eyes for the first time in the long dusk. You keep the place warmer somehow. She couldn't speak. The air smelled of cedar and dusk. Inside, Maisie began to hum again. And just as Celia stepped back into the doorway, a voice called from down the hill. McGraw. A woman's voice, sharp as tin. Mabel Thistle, wrapped in a blue shawl and flanked by two tight-lipped women, marched toward the porch like gossip was a sermon waiting to be preached. 3 mouse now, she said, eyes narrowing on Celia. You bring a child and a lie to this ranch and expect no one to notice? Folks are talking, and rightly so. Clayton rose slowly, boots planted like roots. He looked not at Mabel, but at Maisie peeking from behind the curtain. My girl's clean better than a church floor, he said. That's all I'll say on the matter. Mabel huffed, her face red with fury, but she said no more. Celia turned to hide the trembling in her hands. Shame was a thick coat she had worn too long, but now it felt like it might finally fall. And later, when Maisie tugged on her sleeve and pointed to the stars blinking into the darkening sky, Celia whispered, She called you the fat rancher, but I think she never saw your heart. Behind her, Clayton paused in the doorway. He didn't answer, but in the moonlight his shadow reached out, long enough to touch them both. A windstorm came before dawn, loud and wide like something old and unsettled tearing through the hills. Windows rattled. The barn door flapped loose on one hinge. And when the house finally quieted again, there was a wrongness in the silence. Celia was the first to rise, bare feet chilled on the floorboards. She walked to Maisie's cot and found it empty. The doll still lay tucked beneath the quilt. The child was gone. Clayton, she called, throat closing fast. He was already pulling on boots, a lantern in hand, his hat shoved low on his brow. No questions, no wasted words. He handed her a coat and lit the second lantern. Together, they stepped into the wind-bruised morning. They searched the fence lines first, calling her name, softly, again, then louder. The sun bled upward behind a curtain of cloud. Coyotes yipped in the far distance. The grass was high in some places, bent with rain. Her name felt too small for the vastness of land she might have wandered into. Check the bluff trail, Celia said, voice fraying. She liked the windmill up there. Clayton nodded once and led the way, boots dragging across wet stone and mud. Every breath hurt now, thick with fear. They found her near the base of the bluff, huddled by a patch of wildflowers bowed low with rain. She was cradling something in her arms, a small rabbit, unmoving, stiff from the night chill. Celia dropped to her knees, arms around her daughter, pulling her close. Maisie's skin was icy, her fingers blue-laced. I wanted to save it, Maisie whispered, barely audible. Celia froze. The words, spoken after so long, struck like lightning, quiet but devastating. You spoke, she murmured. Maisie just nodded, tears starting down her cheeks. I didn't mean to make you cry. Clayton crouched beside them, not touching, but close enough that his warmth reached them. He looked at the rabbit, at the small grave the girl had begun digging with her bare hands. You don't have to fix what's dying, darling, he said, voice thick. You just have to stay. Celia looked at him, then really looked at the way his shoulders curved slightly inward, not from shame, but from having carried others too long. At the depth of his gentleness, not born of weakness, but restraint. And she felt the cracks in her ribs widen, not from breaking, but from something softer trying to grow. They returned home slowly, Maisie in Clayton's arms, her little head resting against his shoulder. Later, by the fire, Celia knelt to dry her daughter's feet with a towel warmed by the hearth. Her hands trembled. Shame pooled in her stomach like old water, murky and still. "I don't belong here," she said, her voice hoarse. "I came wearing someone else's name. I use your kindness. I thought it would just be shelter. A few months. Then I'd go. I never thought." Clayton sat in the rocker across from her, hat in his lap. His eyes were soft but unreadable. "I never wanted a bride who feared me," he said finally. "Didn't want a shadow of someone else. I wanted someone who'd stay, even after they saw everything." She raised her eyes. "You've seen everything in me. And you didn't run," he said. That night, Celia couldn't sleep. She watched Maisie's chest rise and fall, soft and rhythmic. The wind had quieted, the world holding its breath. In the morning, there was a knock. Mabel Thistle stood on the porch, a pie in her hands, wrapped in a towel with crocheted edges. Her face was stiff, eyes twitching with the strain of swallowing pride. "Brought you something," she said. Celia hesitated. Clayton stepped behind her, silent as a tree. He took the pie and gave the woman a long, unreadable look. Mabel sniffed. "That girl, she's got strength. And it ain't my place. But maybe I was wrong." Celia nodded slowly, the words sinking in like spring rain. Sheriff Tolland passed by later that day, leaning on his saddle horn. "Folks are saying that mute girl found her voice. And the fat rancher's got more sense than the rest of us." Who'd V guessed? Clayton only shrugged. "Don't need folks to clap. Just need 'em quiet when my girls walk by." The quiet stayed for days. No more stares at the general store. No whispers at the well. The town, fickle as prairie wind, had moved on, or softened at least. One evening, Celia stepped outside and found a swing beneath the cottonwood. It hadn't been there before. The ropes were thick, the seats smooth by hand. Carved into the edge were two letters, asterisk M and M. Asterisk. Maisie was already swinging, her laughter quiet but clear. Celia stood beside Clayton as he watched from the steps, mug in hand. "What does it stand for?" she asked. He sipped. "Maisie and her ma." Her throat thickened. She blinked too quickly. "Could have said Clayton's girls," she murmured. He smiled. Didn't want to carve too much. Let the rest be lived. She reached for his hand without thinking. He let her. The sun sank lower behind the hills, painting the grass in honey light. By midsummer, the fields behind the ranch turned gold. Celia moved slower these days, one hand on her lower back, the other guiding Maisie's curious steps. She laughed more. Clayton caught her humming while folding laundry, her hips swaying slightly like she was remembering what it felt like to dance. Maisie now said small things, apple, pa, sleepy, each one a gem dropped into their days. But the first time she said pa, she said it when Clayton walked through the door, arms full of firewood. He froze. Then the wood dropped with a loud thump. He knelt, arms out, and Maisie ran into them. Celia watched from the stairs, her hand resting gently on her belly. She said nothing. She didn't need to. That night, while he rocked on the porch and she sat beside him, the silence felt like home. Was it ever real for her? She asked suddenly. Analyze. Clayton stared at the horizon a long while. Maybe, but she never waited long enough to find out. Celia nodded. "Do you think," she asked, voice low, "you would have loved her?" Clayton looked at her then, not as a replacement, not as a mistake, but as the only answer that ever truly fit. "I think," he said, "I was always waiting on the wrong train." And before she could speak again, a whistle sounded far off, high and low, drifting from a station like the call of something long past returning. Celia stood, heart heavy with something close to knowing. The past, it seemed, had finally come back to collect its share.